Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Quebec provincial election forecast. But before I begin with the rest of the video, I would just like to shout out all my channel members. And if you want to support the channel, by all means go below and join as a member. That monthly donation really helps keep everything running smoothly and running well. If you can't afford to do that, I understand, and by all means just like, share, subscribe. But with no further ado, let's begin. Now, I will just, on a tangent here, or aside, I changed the Conservatives' colors. They are in Boissier, which is about this color for them, I believe. Let me know if that's distinctive enough, because I know last Quebec video people were complaining that the Conservatives and the CAQ had too similar of a color. Let me know if it's better, if I should tweak it again. Let me know. I can keep trying to tweak it. I'm trying to keep it roughly within the same ballpark of what the party's official color is, which kind of gets difficult with the Parti Québécois and the CAQ having very similar colors as well. They're all shades of blue. But we're doing our best, so let me know in the comments. But with no further ado, let us begin with the rest of the video here. So, we are now at a quite interesting stage here. The Parti Québécois has now taken first place. Now, we're only looking at a minority here. 49 seats. They need 63 for a majority. So they're not in a majority yet, and actually the only reasonable coalition would be with the CAQ. And if that happens, I'm not entirely sure how that works. Maybe there is no coalition and it's just a case-by-case minority government, in which case, well, it would probably only last 1, maybe 2 years. There's no way Plamondon is going to be able to get a referendum through without a majority himself. That's just not going to happen. So, since he can't actually do that, I think he would do everything in his power to actually get his government taken down for a reason that he'd go to the polls for and be like, we should do better or whatever. We need a majority. He would create a reason for this, is what I'm saying. So it would probably be a really short-lived government at this point. It would be short. I'm not even it might even be a snap election, depending on what the polls say. But more importantly to the raw mechanics of what's happening here, we're seeing actually something even slightly more interesting. So if you recall the last video, I was talking about how, or the last video on Quebec, I was talking about how Plamondon and the Parti Québécois are really the only party that discontent for the CAQ can actually turn into real opposition. The Parti Québécois is really the only other party who can win in rural Quebec, the only other party who can reasonably win in Quebec City. This considers a little bit, Quebec Solidaire a little bit, but in the entire Quebec City region, they're really the only other party that can compete there. So if you count all of the rest of Quebec and all of Quebec City, they're really the only other party that matters, actually. I will just bring up the seat trends here. So the Quebec region is 14 seats, and the rest of Quebec collectively is 58, sorry. So right there, you have 72 seats that, for the most part, is really only competitive between those two parties. Yes, the Liberals get 3. Yes, the Quebec Solidaire gets 4. The Conservatives get 1. There's a few Liberal, a few Quebec Solidaire, and a few Conservative seats where they're competitive as like a third place finish. But for the most part, no. And then when you look into the Banlieue de Montreal, i.e. for English speakers, the suburbs of Montreal, so like Laval and this area, and like some of these other ones around the coast here, the outer circle, if you will, the Liberals are a little competitive there. Quebec Solidaire is not particularly competitive at all. The Conservatives are not at all. So then you kind of have a sort of a three-way race there in the Banlieue de Montreal. And then the cumulative of that is basically the entire province except the island of Montreal is for the most part, a two-way race. That's it. On the island of Montreal itself, Parti Québécois is actually reasonably competitive, surprisingly, considering it's, at this stage, primarily a separatist party, a francophone separatist party, and Montreal has a very large Anglophone and allophone population. But among the Anglophone population in Montreal, it's quite popular. In fact, it's actually second place popular vote terms, but its vote is just more inefficient than Quebec Solidaire's currently. Though if I just move this over here so we can see better. That does mean, though, some of these ridings in like the northeast of Montreal, the more French part of Montreal, if you will, those could be competitive. We could see some Quebec Solidaire, Parti Québécois races depending on how this goes. And again, by popular vote here, it really starts to be clear what I mean. Like, yeah, Quebec Solidaire is sort of competitive in these regions. They're not really in the Benelux de Montreal. In Quebec City and the rest of Quebec, there's areas that Conservatives are a bit competitive. You can kind of see by the popular vote. But the CAQ and the Parti Québécois just dominate. Collectively, here they're looking at 63% of the vote in those two regions. And the rest of the vote is very split among very specific parties. At this stage in its existence, the Liberals are basically just getting Anglophone, allophone voters. Very few other people they win. And the people they do win who aren't those are usually like kind of federal bureaucrats or just very pro-Canada francophones. And there's not actually that many of them left anymore. There's not that many federalist, super pro-Canada francophones. There might be some neutral francophones left, but there's not many very pro. The Conservatives kind of win the conservative French voters. The people that the federal Conservatives win, it's almost like these two parties, while actually being quite different policy-wise, are very similar base-wise in Quebec itself. And Quebec Solidaire really is kind of an interesting party. It's kind of like a more of a socialisty party, more of a young, diverse vote kind of thing. So they don't really do that well in older, homogenous rural Quebec. It's specifically places like Sherbrooke or some of the native areas, or more heavily native areas in the west, or some of the union parts of the west, or industrial areas of western Quebec, where they can kind of do well. But there's not many. Not many. So, as we just touched on, the opposition really is, the race is really between the two of them. And because the race is really between these two parties, what we're seeing here is a really good case study about how owning an issue matters. So the main difference, well, let's start a little further back. The CAQ and the Parti Québécois are similar parties. They're both nationalistic. They're both somewhat socially conservative. They're not social conservative in any useful sense of the term, other than immigration. Well, they are social conservative in the context of Quebec. So they're not anti-abortion, they're not anti-gay marriage, they're not anti-stuff like that, right? But they are about preserving Quebec culture, Quebecois culture, as they see it right now. So in that regard, they're spiritually socially conservative, if you will. Now, the CAQ is slightly more economically right-wing. Not much, but a little bit. It's a little bit more paternalistic. The Parti Québécois is a little more center-left on economics, but not much. So they're very similar parties. The main difference between them, as I've touched on in the past, is Legault says we should try to extract wealth from Canada and then leave. And Plamondon is saying, if we do that, Canada will destroy French culture in Quebec, and there'll be nothing left to leave with. We must leave now and then make us rich. There is no being rich and leaving. There will be nothing left. That is the main difference. It's not even, strictly speaking, a policy difference. They both want to leave. It's not, strictly speaking, a practicality difference. They both believe leaving is good. It's really just a question of time. And this is where owning the issue matters a lot. See, since they're very similar parties, they're naturally and definitionally going for very similar voters. This is why, well, Legault was ascendant leading up to 2022, and he was dominating the polls, dominating the election. The Parti Québécois looked like it was dying, looked like it was going to go away. It was on its last legs. Because the CAQ just naturally gobbles up all those voters. It's a very similar party. It doesn't take much mental rationalization for a CAQ or Parti Québécois voter to vote CAQ if they think Legault is giving them a good argument. The flip side, though, is if voters get disillusioned with Legault, they will jump off that boat really quickly because there's another party right there already that's easily convincible, easily acceptable to them, because it's very similar. We're not talking about going from the Conservatives to the Liberals. We're not even talking about going from the Conservatives to the PPC. We're talking going from, like, the Conservatives to the Reform Party of old. They're different, but they're so similar that voters would fluidly move between those to the best party that they see. And that's where we are in Quebec here. And that's what you really need to understand. Voters between Parti Québécois and the CAQ are very fluid. Right now, Plamondon is doing really well. If Legault smartens up, fixes the problems, addresses Plamondon's criticism, he could regain all this ground in a heartbeat. But if he keeps failing, we could easily see Plamondon get 40% of the vote. More. In principle, I see that there's no reason he couldn't get like 43, 44%. Right now. If things continue. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying there's no reason to doubt that capacity. Because basically the entirety of the CAQ voter base, for the most part, would be okay with voting Parti Québécois. Now, am I saying that the Parti Québécois is going to get 43%? No. But I'm saying it's plausible. There's nothing to doubt that. To give you a comparison, if we're looking at this the same time last year, February 2023, and you're looking at federal Canadian politics, there is no reason at that stage to think the Conservatives could hit 43%. Turns out they could hit 43%. There was no reason to believe that at the time. There seemed to be no path. So what is obvious and seemingly plausible now could be wildly wrong in a year. A year's a long time. But let's circle back here. What is this, and what do I mean about owning an issue? Well, naturally, Plamondon is owning the sovereignty issue. If you are a more federal viewer, not a Quebec viewer, picture how Poilievre is owning housing or owning the carbon tax. He's making that his issue. In the same way, Plamondon is owning the question of sovereignty. And when you have a nationalist party versus a sovereigntist party, and you are owning the issue of sovereignty, that puts you in a very strong position. Makes you a very unassailable position. It's very hard to deal with that. Plamondon's argument is actually quite effective as well. Not just emotionally, but just logically speaking. It makes a lot of sense to people who are already inclined to vote for a nationalist party. Canada, right now, in 2024, as I record this, is recording the highest immigration it's ever seen. Canada, as of 2024, as I'm recording this, February 11th, has stagnant GDP growth per capita. The government seems completely incapable of solving those problems and just keeps ramping up more immigration and having some more and more flatlined per capita GDP growth. Why does this matter to Quebec separatism? And why is this a lethal combination if the rest of Canada wants Quebec to stay? Well, what is Legault's argument again? That we can be in Canada, we can keep our nation safe, the nation being the Quebecois, and we can get rich. Well, if Canada as a whole is getting poorer, and at the same time, the ethnic, cultural, linguistic identity of the Quebecois is under mortal peril because it is going to be drowned out with immigrants coming in who don't speak English. They don't even speak English a lot of the time, but they definitely usually don't speak French. And it's not so much that the immigrants going to Quebec in first order don't speak French, but once an immigrant's in Ontario or in Alberta, there's nothing stopping them from moving to Quebec once they have their permanent residence card, once they have a citizenship. Nothing stops them. So not only do you have the first order immigration from overseas who might not speak French into Quebec, but you also have immigrants from the rest of Canada going to Quebec who might not speak French. And this does many things. One, it can drown out and shrink the share of the French language, which is actually happening. Slowly, very slightly, but it is going down. To give you an idea here, I only have data up until 2006 offhand. I could have looked this up more, but whatever. 1996, right after the referendum, it was about 82% French and 20 or 18% Anglo-allophone. By 2006, just 10 years later, you're about 79% French, and allophone is increasing significantly relative to Anglophone, but they're now collectively 21%. Since then, it's even more so, but I don't have more recent numbers because, I don't know, I didn't think to pick this up. Wait, okay, sorry. I just quickly found this. It's now 27% today. As of 2016 census. So another 10 years later, going from 21 to 27. So the use of French as a mother tongue is decreasing. I can't tell you everyday use offhand, but mother tongue, it's decreasing. Ethnicity-wise, obviously decreasing. That's not even remotely even meaningfully comparative. Current population projections suggest that current European stock Quebecois are going to lose about 5% population share over the next 17 years. And actually, raw numbers go down because fertility rates are terrible in all of Canada. So, if the economy sucks, so Quebec can't get rich, and the nation of Quebec is being under pressure from inward migration from the rest of Canada and outward migration from other areas, encroaching on the ethnic, linguistic, cultural majority of Quebec. That really does seem like Plamondon is correct. That maybe it isn't a good idea to stay in Quebec. And that seems to be what's happening and why the Quebecois, or the Parti Québécois, is gaining ground. Now, we're not in a definitive position just yet about referendum-wise. It looks like some polls are saying it's... let me pull up the actual raw numbers. I don't have the raw numbers here. Anyways, it's looking like some of the polls are saying separatism is like yes vote on a separation referendum is increasing. Some say it's flatlined. Not very clear yet. But at the same token, the main thing that matters is if the leadership of an area, Canada, Quebec, is liked by the population and if they support or oppose such a referendum. If the leaders, the people trust, people like, want to leave and there's no good counter-signaling, they'll win. Will there be no counter-signaling? I don't know. Can't say that for certain, but it does definitely look like the anti-federalist side in provincial Quebec is in complete disarray, unlike 1995, when there was a clear unified Quebec Liberal Party against them. Now it's in shambles and split in two, basically. The Federalist vote is... There's two proper Federalist parties, and a lot of Federalists vote Quebec Solidaire or CAQ, actually. Okay. And I just want to be clear to people watching in the audience here, I don't actually want Quebec to leave. I think it'd be bad for Canada. But doesn't mean I'm going to... I'm going to be honest and frank with the analysis here. But I don't actually want Quebec to leave. I just want to be clear. So, Plamondon's arguments he's making at a time when a lot of data is coming out that this is starting to become persuasive, starting to become a concern, a real concern. The Legault's strategy seems to be failing. Maybe Quebec could become a rich province under enough Legault premierships. Might be a half province. Might be giving equalization payments to Alberta. Probably not, but for the sake of humor, maybe it is. Does it matter, though, if it ceases to have the quality, the character that the French nationalists want to preserve, want to protect? And that's the question we're going to see in 26. That's literally the entirety of what this election is going to be. Now, we're 2 years away. More than 2 years away. We're like 2.5 years away. But right now, February 2024, that's going to be what the election is. The election is going to be about money versus culture. It's going to probably be mostly an emotional election and not a strictly rational one. And when I say that, I don't mean if Plamondon wins, that's an irrational decision. What I mean is the vote for Plamondon. If Plamondon wins and he gets his majority, and he then be able to do a referendum, say 28, that scenario, that event chain, is not about money. It's not about objective stats. It's about the idea that the only way to protect and preserve the Quebecois nation is to be separate. In a similar sense, it would be like polling religious people, say Catholics, and saying, should we destroy the church? That's not going to be a decision made on rational grounds. Whether you can make a rational argument for it, you can make a rational argument for Quebec leaving. But the motivation, the reason why people will vote for it, is emotional. The reason why that vote will fail is because people don't care. You will never convince somebody to do something dramatic, drastic, wildly change the status quo on bean counters. In Plamondon, thus far, sees this. Now, before I finish up here, I'll just touch on a few specific factors. So, there's been a lot of people asking, specifically, what is Legault doing wrong? And there's lots of small ones, like he canceled a highway around Quebec City, which really angered a lot of people around Quebec City, in the suburbs and stuff. It's kind of wishy-washy, a little soft in character, a little off his game. Some strikes he hasn't handled well, etc. But there's a bigger issue. And this bigger issue feeds back into why specifically the Parti Québécois is gaining. Because it was something like the highway expansion, or if it was about strikes, or if it was about just kind of being a wishy-washy, weak, wheeling leader right now, some other parties might be gaining significant ground. And again, if we go back here, we can see, popular vote-wise, no one else is gaining significant ground, and actually the Conservatives are losing ground. The only party actually gaining relevant ground is the Parti Québécois, which tells us the only issue, the main issue, that has hit Quebec, the main two, I should say. The first one, this is a smaller one, is economics. Quebec is generally doing better than the rest of Canada, but Canada's doing so bad that better than the rest of Canada is still bad. But the second factor, a more important factor, more relevant factor, is immigration. Legault had promised that immigration to Quebec would be less than 50,000. And it's not. It's been and continues to be more than that. And Plamondon is hitting him extremely hard on that line, on immigration itself. And that's one of the reasons, one of the core reasons why this is failing so hard. Just look again at this map. Where is the Parti Québécois gaining seats? Do you see something here? We have Gaspé's. We have whatever this, Saguenay? Is that what this is called? I'm not familiar with the Quebec region off the top of my head. We have the Laurentides here. This part, I can't think of the name of. My French region names are terrible, again. Quebec City area. What is in common with all of these regions? They're like 99% Francophone. Even the parts of Montreal and Laval. Over here. This area. Here. These are more Francophone than the rest of the region by like a large degree. If you compare Pointe de Ile with St. John, which I think is, or Dorval, which is I believe right there, it's like night and day. It's like inverse. I think Dorval is like 80% Anglo-Anglophone, and Pointe de Ile is like 80% Francophone, something like that. I don't recall the exact numbers off the top of my head, but it's in that ballpark. Like, it's almost the opposite. So the regions that are starting to flip the most are the most Francophone regions. And the Francophone regions that are the most stubborn, Saguenay itself, like Saguenay itself, parts of Appalachians, wow, I can't speak at all, around Trois-Rivières area. These are the most conservative parts of Quebec. So they're voting overwhelmingly for CAQ and Parti Québécois. But since they're so conservative, they're slightly more favorable to the more center-right economically CAQ for now. And the rest of the province, it's exactly how you would expect. Anglophone, southern Montreal, liberals. Super downtown, super urban areas, Quebec Solidaire. And that's right now. That's what is happening. The reason why the Parti Québécois is gaining so much ground, why they're winning where they are winning. Because again, Quebec RMR, they're only up, or they're up 24%. The rest of the province, they're up 16%. They're up 14% in the Banlieue de Montreal, the Frenchest part of the Montreal area. All of these areas are gaining so much ground for the Parti Québécois because the issue of sovereignty is dominated by the Parti Québécois. The issue of nationalism is being dominated by them. They are winning the issue, and because they're winning the issue and they're dominating the issue, they are winning these voters. If current trends hold and Legault doesn't smarten up and start acting more as voters need him to act, we should not be surprised if come 2026, the CAQ is at 14% and the Parti Québécois is around 40% again. Inverse of the 2022 numbers here. These 2022. Well, sort of. Their turnout is not modeled the same way. This is the model. This is based on the turnout of my model, not the actual election results. But anyways, just reverse the 2026 or 2022 election, but with Parti Québécois and CAQ, and that's probably what we'll see if Legault doesn't smarten up and doesn't change. I don't think the CAQ will die. If Quebec stays in Canada, or let's say the referendum fails in 2028, the referendum fails, the CAQ won't die. CAQ is not going anywhere. Parti Québécois won't go anywhere. It's going to happen, barring the next Liberal leader being really good, which doesn't look like it based on the people in their leadership race so far. Barring that Liberal leader being really good, we're going to see the CAQ and the Parti Québécois have a big old battle between the two of them. Until one of them wins, or the French are now a minority in Quebec. As long as about 80%, it's going to be those two parties. And they're going to get the majority of the vote of the French people. And in a sense, the best way to look at this is you can almost mentally just delete the Liberal vote share from the election and just delete about 20 seats. So picture the elections out of 105 seats. And it's only out of, I don't know, 84% of the vote. That's basically where you should picture the election right now. Where you should picture Quebec politics right now. By this model, the Parti Québécois is about 36%, and the CAQ is about 31%. That's kind of where this is, because the two parties that can actually gain ground and win seats and stuff right now are going to get an irrelevant percentage of the Anglophone and Allophone vote, because both of them actually don't want those voters. They literally don't want them. They want them to leave. Why do you think Legault has passed bills to restrict Anglophones going to non-Quebec residents or non-Francophones, really, going to Quebec universities who are not residents of Quebec? He didn't do that because he thinks it's going to make the Anglophones in Quebec speak more French. He wants Anglophones or Allophones to stop coming to Quebec. It's a really roundabout, inefficient immigration change. That's exactly why he's doing that. But I will wrap this up for here. If you have any comments or questions, by all means ask below. But otherwise, I'll see you guys next week with hopefully something new. I'm going to try to get Saskatchewan this month. I don't know if it'll be next week, but we'll see.